I do not have BPD. I do not have psychosis. I have ADHD, and I was experiencing extreme limerence with my psychiatrist.
All right, she said it herself. She is suffering from limerence. You've probably seen this woman before circulating the internet for the past a week or so. It's a 25-part series of a woman named Kendra Hitley. She claims that she fell in love with her psychiatrist and that he kept her anyway. I'm coming at this from the angle of a licensed mental health therapist and as an expert on treating limerence. So in this video, I want to analyze this limerent episode and to point out her distorted perceptions about the clinical process and the dynamic she enters in with her psychiatrist. Very briefly, if you're not familiar with limerence, it is a mind-altering obsession with another person. Imagine being in an infatuated state, turning the volume up all the way. And the classic limerence symptoms we will see throughout her videos is that she puts a lot of emotional significance to very minor and even neutral things. I do want to say that this isn't how all limerence appears. This just, to me, looks more like erotomania, but if limerence goes unchecked, it is very possible for people to really up their inappropriate behavior that could lead to harassment. So I am not treating Kendra. I don't know her personally. These are just some of my insights based on my own clinical practice and based on working with clients with limerence. So we know that Kendra is a 38-year-old woman and she's a coach for ADHD, inspired by her own personal experience with treating herself. We know that she wants to get back on meds, so she seeks out a psychiatrist. There are some key players that she is going to mention. One of them is her psychiatrist, and then there's also her therapist, both of which she claims to be master manipulators in this narrative that mental health professionals abusing and controlling her. Now, there's another key player who will come in named Henry, who adds fuel to the psychosis that she is having. So we're just going to start from the very beginning, starting from 1 to 15, and then we're going to go into a second series on this.
You know, I just went right into it. I trusted him enough, of course, why wouldn't I, to tell him about my childhood trauma, my daddy issues, if you will, what I had went through, all of the relationship trauma that I had.
So keep in mind, this is the intake process. It's very normal to ask things about somebody's biopsychosocial history, like their family history, if there's any previous mental health diagnosis that they have. And so when she refers to having daddy issues, this is part of the process of working with any mental health professional is to gather some background information that might help with the treatment plan process and to create goals that are tailored for that person.
And he just listened and nodded. And that's the thing about psychiatrists, is that they're good at pretending to listen. They can appear connected, but that doesn't mean that they're always connected.
And I would say, as a licensed therapist, I can assure you that we are not pretending to listen. We are trying our best to listen, especially during the intake process, because it's going to make it really hard down the road if we don't remember anything about our clients.
I saw him every month, and he just made me feel like I was his friend. He was really, really funny and cracked jokes and told me he was impressed with my running that I would do. And yeah, so of course I loved the attention that I got from him. And it was in my third session with him, because at this point we were all on Zoom, that I asked him, I said, hey, do you mind if I call you by your first name? And he's Pakistani, so I said his first name wrong. And he said, well, it's pronounced this, but yes, of course you can. And he seemed so smug and happy with himself. And I know that that is because that was his first sign that him pretending like we're friends was working. And to be fair to me, I had only ever been to therapy before. I didn't realize that, it's important to call your doctor last name. I mean, I did know that. I did it with all my other doctors, but it just showed that the boundaries were blurring, and he liked
So
that.
throughout this story, we are going to see that she uses a lot of defenses and cognitive distortions. She's going to project a lot. So when she says that the boundaries are starting to blur, she's referring to the boundaries that she's blurring, not that he's blurring. She's the one who wants to call him by his first name, which also creates this intimacy. He has no idea, likely, that this is happening in her mind. Him appearing smug, that's her interpretation as the first sign that he likes this game, that he likes it. She doesn't ever verify this. And then she starts using his identifiers, which to me is a really big issue because revealing his ethnicity and his name, he can't even defend himself because as a therapist, we aren't allowed to say if Kim Kardashian was my client, I can't say, "Oh, she's my client," because clients are protected by HIPAA. So there's no way he can go on and share his side of the story.
So from then on, from my third session on, I started calling him his first name. And then he just started turning up the volume on us being friendly. And he would ask me, for the first 6 sessions, he asked me after the meds, he said, "How's your bowels, bladder, and appetite?" And I would say they're all normal. And then he would ask me any thoughts of harm. And apparently that's pretty common for psychiatry to ask those questions. And then on our 6th session, when things were really, the chemistry was starting to be there before, like, I didn't realize it. I was like, oh, this man is just friendly. And he said, "I have to ask this because it's a special interest of mine, but is there any thoughts of harm?" Like I was special to him. And I said, "No, no thoughts of harm." And he didn't ever ask me a clinical question again. He stopped asking me about my bladder, bowels, and appetite, and he stopped asking me about thoughts of harm. So to me, I would just show up and he was like a therapy appointment.
She's might be misunderstanding what he means when he says it's a special interest of mine. It doesn't mean that he thinks she's special. It is part of protocol to make sure that our clients are not in danger to themselves or to anyone else. So it's possible that he meant that his specialty is working with high risk clients who have an increased risk of suicide. So he's kind of just checking in. And him not asking those other questions again might be because it wasn't really an area of concern that she denied. She denied every issue with her bowels and whatnot. So again, she's starting to exaggerate their connection. And if he makes her feel like a friend, that is part of his job. That is part of a mental health professional's job, is to make our clients feel safe. I think most therapists are under the understanding of person-centered or client-centered work, which is about active listening and focusing on this collaborative decision-making and promoting well-being. She's just taking it very, very personally.
He would just tell me these little things about his successes and all of the cool things that he was doing in his life. And it made me fall for him, honestly. And he was really good at listening. And I mean, he's a Pisces, right? So of course he's going to be there and be able to go deep with my feelings. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't extracting from them. Anyway, so I would beg him to let me see him every week. Beg him, because my therapist at the time, he was fine. He wasn't a predator, but
I mean, in the psychiatrist's defense, we make small talk. You make small talk even in professional settings. It doesn't mean you're being fake. You're trying to warm up. I'm guessing that when he's sharing his successes, he's trying to build sense of competence and warmth so that he can more easily connect with her, not to trick her into falling in love with him. When we experience limerence, there is some emotional significance to things that are very normal and neutral, because when you are in a limerent state, you're always looking for signs that this person secretly likes you or that you guys have something special. So we're going to see a lot of that. Just notice the language that she's using.
And I got a new therapist. And this new therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD, she was pretty helpful. So I stopped asking my psychiatrist, begging, honestly, to be my therapist and let me see him more, right? Which also should have been a red flag. But then I started focusing on this therapist. However, I would tell the therapist how obsessed I was with my psychiatrist, and she didn't do anything about it. She just was interested. She also loved stories about my dating life, and yeah, she also was getting supply from me in her own way. But so I went back to just being okay with seeing Irfan once a month, while he was giving me these little breadcrumbs of making me feel special, telling me about his professional achievements, telling me about how he's getting international recognition. And it worked. I was really impressed.
So she starts seeing the therapist, and she has the same feeling, the same dynamic. She believes that both of them are extracting something from her feelings and also getting supply from her. And she's starting to use the language that we hear a lot when we hear about abuse survivors. She's saying supply, breadcrumbing. These are all language that survivors use when they experience trauma. I would be interested to know what she said exactly when was telling her therapist that she was obsessed with him. I wonder if that was the language she was using.
I got a new therapist. I stopped begging my psychiatrist to see me weekly. And that is when the intermittent reinforcement started. Some sessions he'd be warm and kind and wonderful and let me in on little parts of his life and like be vulnerable with me or pretend. Other sessions, he would be cold and clinical and detached. And you know what that did? It made me work harder in our next sessions. It did. And it started the addiction that I had to him. 100%. And he knew exactly what he was doing. This man gives lectures on trauma and attachment theory. He used his psychiatric training to manipulate me and get me hooked. And guess what? It worked.
Again, she's applying language that we normally hear when we're talking about domestic abuse survivors. Intermittent reinforcement, it's kind of like a slot machine. It makes you addicted. That's how somebody might get addicted to a person when the person is love bombing them. They're kind of breadcrumbing them. These are all language that people use when they're dealing with a narcissist. She's assuming that her psychiatrist is using his expertise to control her or to act hot and cold. This can very well be her limerence responding to every small indicator that he could like her. Sometimes he seems like he doesn't like her. If you've ever experienced limerence, you know how much your moods can depend on your interactions with the limerent object, with the person that you are infatuated by.
In January of 2024, I was hit by a car turning left as I was going through a green light. And
now this is where the story gets really bizarre. I don't know if she got hit by a car or not, but she continues her appointment and she's saying that she told her psychiatrist that she was internally bleeding and he didn't care, which I highly doubt would be the case. But as we can see, the language that she's using to say that she risked her life and she was like dying to go to this appointment, that she would do that above all else. No one is making her do that except herself. She's putting her life in danger.
After I risked my life to see him, that's when he really started turning up the intimacy in our appointments. However, he was really smart and knew the professional lines like the back of his hand. So he would comment on my appearance, but not compliment my appearance. So I would come on screen and he would say, "Oh, you curled your hair." Or I would come on screen and he would say, "Oh, you're wearing glasses." And of course I felt seen and excited that he was noticing these things about me. I didn't realize at this time that he had feelings for me too.
And the part where her psychiatrist is not complimenting her is quite normal. We're trained to just make observations. We're not supposed to be necessarily complimenting our clients, but I mean, it really depends on the context. You want to stay objective, so you do point out things so they feel seen. So he's technically doing his job.
So I was so excited when he noticed my glasses that I ran and showed him my other pair, and he said, "I prefer turtle shell glasses." So even though I usually wear contacts, I'm wearing these turtle shell glasses in these videos because just in case he sees them ever, he'll see me in his favorite glasses. He did tell me he likes the turtle shell. Anyway, it was just inappropriate things like that. Little teeny things that he let me in.
Drew, this is a very classic example of limerence. If somebody says, "I like rock and roll," then all of a sudden, you like rock and roll. If he likes turtle shell glasses, she's going to start wearing them. When you're in limerent episode, you want so badly to get the attention of the other person that you are obsessed with. But the way she interprets it is that he's letting her in.
And all this time, my best friend is an emergency medicine physician. And she told me, she said, "Kendra, one of these days, your psychiatrist," she would use his name, "is going to say, 'I can't be your doctor anymore. I want to be with you. I want to be with you so bad. I can't be your doctor. I'll see you in 2 years.'" So my best friend, who's a doctor, she picks up on stuff like that. So even she knew that our relationship was crossing boundaries and getting weird, but that became my dream, was for my psychiatrist, I almost use his name, to do that. And I told him about Brianna saying that, my best friend, who's the emergency medical doc. I told him that she would tell me that, and he just would be silent. He didn't disagree, but he didn't agree, and that was weaponized neutrality was his favorite game to play, right? He didn't disagree with Brianna telling me that my psychiatrist had feelings for me.
Again, with the language that she's using, weaponized neutrality, another way to look at it is just neutrality. Maybe that could have been his opportunity to stop it, and that's what she's indicating. However, she's the one who's enjoying this. She's assuming that he's enjoying this. She likes to test his boundaries, trying to see how far she can take it.
It was also around this time that I asked my psychiatrist if he had diagnosed me with anything other than ADHD when I had my initial diagnosis. And he said, "Yeah, I did." I said, "Oh, what did you diagnose me with?" And he said, "Well, you had a lot of traumatic things happen to you in childhood because of your dad, and so I diagnosed you with other trauma and stressor related disorder." And that was the first little ping that I got of that was weird. Why would he keep that from me? I asked why wouldn't he tell me that? That seems important. He didn't tell me because he was using that information to manipulate me. He knew I had trauma and stressor disorder. He used it against me.
She has a lot of confirmation biases, and this particular distortion means that if she believes something, she's going to see it. So she already sees him as a manipulator. So anything that he doesn't tell her looks like withholding information rather than just he didn't tell her. She's right that she could have known that, but it might have not been relevant to what they were talking about, so it didn't come up.
January 2023, at this point, I was full-blown obsessed with my psychiatrist. And My therapist wasn't helping me. My psychiatrist wasn't helping me. He was feeding it. And then I got a boyfriend. And at first, my psychiatrist wasn't really that keen, but then my psychiatrist realized that my boyfriend was a lot like my psychiatrist. And then I started talking to my psychiatrist about my sex life, about tracking my cycle, using the fertility awareness method. And my psychiatrist loved it. He didn't never say, this isn't inappropriate to your care, let's pivot. Oh, he just let me talk and talk and talk about my sex life.
Okay, so again, there's possibly some projection. She's the one who liked talking about her sex life, but she's projecting that he likes it. He never said so. She might enjoy talking about her sex life to her psychiatrist to see his reaction and to fantasize that he's fantasizing about her because he's never really confirmed that he likes listening. It's really just his job to listen, is another way to look at it. And what likely happened here, why he didn't stop her and why he started asking these questions, is that he's a psychiatrist. So he might ask questions about tracking her cycle and the fertility method, which is in line with hormones and talking about your moods. That's probably how they started talking about her sex life. I don't think he was trying to gain anything from that.
So, my therapist, who I didn't know at this time had bad boundaries, but she did, I went to her because my boyfriend and I, after like more than a year together, we started having issues in the bedroom.
So this is where her mental health issue really plummets. This is also the point where she turns off her TikTok comments because her claims get more and more bizarre, and more people in the comments are probably pointing that out to her. I'm just going to summarize this part because it's all over the place. So basically, she's saying that her therapist told her to talk to her psychiatrist about her sex life because the therapist wanted a male perspective, which is very unlikely and a very outdated idea. And she believes that her therapist and her psychiatrist want her to continue seeing her boyfriend, even though she's not getting her needs met, because they want her to continue going to get help and from the psychiatrist. So both of them are master manipulators in her narrative.
What was perfect about him was he wasn't meeting my needs. So I was still coming to my psychiatrist looking for emotional validation, which he would drip to me slowly. And he looked down and smiled so big in that moment. He smiled so big. And I loved it. It's so gross thinking about it. And then I proceeded to give him 30 minutes of non-stop content about my intimate life with my boyfriend. And I actually recorded the whole thing because I was so excited about it. But now it makes me sick. I can't even listen to the recording. I've tried to start, but pretty much his Christmas morning, the almost 2.5 years of grooming me to get me to talk about sexual things with him worked. And he got 30 minutes of nonstop content to use.
Again, another language that comes from somebody who's in an actual abusive relationship. Grooming primes the person for abuse. She did something very inappropriate, which is to record the session without his consent, which I'm guessing was without his consent, but she's claiming that he did something inappropriate.
I need to address 3 things. 1, people are asking me what my mental health diagnosis is. I do not have BPD. I do not have psychosis. I have ADHD. And I was experiencing extreme limerence with my psychiatrist. Limerence is a normal thing to happen to anyone who is experiencing hot and cold behavior from someone. And it happens more often in people with ADHD because we have dopamine dysregulation and rejection sensitive dysphoria. And guess what? My psychiatrist knew that and used it to his advantage.
She denies BPD, psychosis, and acknowledges limerence. While there are some research that suggests there's a link between ADHD and limerence, it isn't cause and effect. She fails to mention that limerence is a mind-altering state that can make you very, very delusional. And in her case, it kind of sounds like more, what is it called? Erotomania. Very like baby reindeer type predatory behavior.
I need to take a moment. Moment taken. It is so incredibly disturbing to me, the amount of people that are predator protectors in my comments, that are victim blaming me, especially the mental health practitioners in my comments using therapy speak to say that this situation that I was in was my fault or that I was delusional.
Limerence is a delusion. It is something that alters your perceptions, your memories, your mood, and to me sounds like her limerent mind is searching for the signs. I mean, this hot and cold that she's talking about sounds very much like the limerent brain experiencing that hope of reciprocation and that fuel of uncertainty. It is a very mind warping experience.
I thought that everything was hunky-dory and that I was just in love with my psychiatrist and it was totally normal. Little did I know he was manufacturing everything so I could fall in love with him, because it was on him to set the professional boundary and not let attention build. So days after my psychiatrist's Christmas morning appointment from a few videos back, where he got a crush confession from me and then 30 minutes of non-stop intimate content that he did not stop me, my boyfriend and I broke up days later. So then I started dating this other guy.
So I'm just going to summarize this part again because it's very all over the place. But she ends up going on a date with a guy because her and her boyfriend break up. And she dates this guy who actually happens to be a therapist. And he ends up telling her about inappropriate feelings he's had for one of his clients.
For whatever he wanted to use it for, right? And if my psychiatrist was good at anything, it was being professional and acting professional and technically not crossing any lines. And he thought that he was so good at it, because he was good at it. But that doesn't mean he wasn't doing it. I went to my psychiatrist and I told him this story about this man that I went on a date with who's a therapist. Looked like he had seen a ghost and like he was gonna vomit, because he prided himself on being an extremely professional and buttoned up person. But here I was holding a mirror to him with exactly what he was doing, but a bumbling idiot telling me like how he was doing it without the fancy degree, without any of that. I look back on that now and it's just crazy. And so it just tainted all the fantasy material that I'd given him the session before.
My guess, based on limerent clients that I've worked with, there was a part of her that hoped that her psychiatrist could relate to this, even though she's disguising it as disgust and being like, oh, I caught you, I know what you do. I think she's making a very loose connection, which is something she probably secretly desires is happening behind closed doors.
I am now in TikTok jail. I got a violation on the video where I talked about really the biggest damning evidence against my psychiatrist. And so because of that, I have to be really careful. So I'm going to do my very best to not be reactive, because the people in my DMs telling me that they've been through this too, it's keeping me going. It's not my mental health spiral. And I can understand that for some people in the mental health space, because they have been some of the loudest people to speak out against what I'm doing, it's hard to grasp that someone could have this level of predation in such a high place
But
of
it's not
power.
hard to grasp. This is a common issue in places of authority will utilize their power for harm. Not in all cases, but there are enough cases for this to be an issue. But it does a disservice to the population of those who really have experienced this for her to be creating loose connections and interpretations based on her cognitive distortions that may very well be coming from limerence.
I had such a big crush on him at the time, and I recorded all 33 minutes. So this is why, if my psychiatrist wants to come with me to me and like sue me for defamation, I have a 33-minute recording of me admitting I have a crush on him and speaking about extremely intimate details.
So this is a very critical part. If she ever does press charges, if what she's saying is true, she'll have the most compelling evidence, which is that 33-minute recording she says she has.
So this is when the chemistry really started going off the charts with me and my psychiatrist, and I held it alone for months, like after that Christmas morning appointment of his, and then after I innocently told him about my date with the therapist. He really started letting me in more and showing more parts of himself and, turning up the intimacy. And that was exciting to me, and it made me fall for him more. And then I start emailing him my fun little emails, but he stops writing me back. He does not write back to my emails anymore. Because once again, he was really good at plausible deniability. But what he did do is he would take my emails and mention them in session. So he would still give me the attention that I was craving, but only under his structure, under his control, where there was no paper trail. And I loved that too.
This is a nightmare client situation because everything that he's doing sounds very, very normal. If a client is messaging you in between sessions, it like most therapists will say like that's not like there's nothing illegal about it, but you want to be careful because there are clients who may misinterpret that is still part of the clinical process and the therapeutic relationship. And so he's going to just bring it up in session instead so that he can create a healthier boundary between them. But instead, she sees this as like him playing a game.
And then every week I would go to my therapist and tell her about how much I loved my psychiatrist. And she didn't help me at all. She just kind of like enjoyed hearing about it, honestly. I was like, he sees people in person? And she said, yeah, he has been for years. I was like, I want to see him in person. So then in my next therapy appointment, after finding out that he was lying to me about seeing patients in person, I told her that. I told my 75-year-old PhD therapist that my psychiatrist wasn't lied to me about seeing people in person. And she looked at me and she said, well, it's probably because he knows that there will be a lot of sexual tension in the room if you go in person. So make sure that you understand that when you go.
I highly doubt her therapist said that. And again, she won't be able to defend herself because she's not allowed to under HIPAA. The scary part is that Kendra is now wanting to harass him in person.
And I understand, like, some people may think that this is part of my crash out or part of me harassing him, which is what I've gotten lots of accusations of. But I just would like to remind everyone that, of course, it seems that way. But I was just responding to a dynamic which my psychiatrist fostered. There was chemistry between us because he allowed it.
She says she's just responding to a dynamic that the psychiatrist fostered, which is, again, the issue with having limerence go unchecked. There is this perception that the tension and the feelings are reciprocated, but really they're coming from within the person. There's a lot of projection, and this idea that she is sharing all these intimate things with him and he is enjoying it is something that her mind is making up.
And you better believe I showed up to the next session and said you lied to me because you were afraid of the tension that would be there between us. He just didn't say anything. Why didn't you tell me that when I asked? And he said, oh, I just didn't think you'd want to come in. And that was such a weak lie from him, from someone who is so scripted and controlled. He didn't even have a plausible thing to say. Of course he knew I wanted to come in. I had a crush on him. I told him that often.
It's very obvious, if she could accurately read the signs, that he was probably uncomfortable and he has a right to his own safety. If a client were constantly emailing me and telling me how much they liked me, I would probably want to create some distance. And if she was using the word having a crush on him, I almost wish that he had addressed her obsession, shot her down, but who knows?
So then my therapist starts texting me in between our weekly meetings, asking me for advice on her other clients. And I was a new coach. I had only been coaching for about a year, and I had just left my full-time job to be a coach full-time. And I was flattered that she would ask me advice on her other clients. I just thought, oh my gosh, a 75-year-old woman with a PhD wants my advice on what she should do with her clients.
This might be a gray area in the ethics. It could be considered a dual relationship if you're asking your client for some professional resources, but it isn't necessarily illegal. And therapists ask all the time for referrals and resource purposes as long as it doesn't interfere with their therapeutic process. You got to kind of do a gut check on that.
So then November rolls around and I'm about to meet my psychiatrist in person for the first time. So I wear a really pretty dress, I do my makeup, of course, right? And then my psychiatrist comes into the foyer and I am just so excited to finally meet him. I'd been his patient for 3 years at this point, and he had been feeding the dynamic for 3 years. And I was just thrilled to meet him. And I ran up and I gave him the biggest hug. And you know what he did? He barely patted me on the back. It was the most awkward thing ever. But I am so glad that he did that. I am really glad, because this is what I mean. My psychiatrist was many things, but he was not stupid. So I didn't ever touch him again. And I'm grateful that our relationship didn't ever cross that line, because it would have made everything so much harder. Anyway, and I tell him that my therapist had texted me asking me for advice on her other clients. And he just looked at me and he said, Kendra, that is a huge boundary violation. She should not be doing that. My psychiatrist did not like sloppy people. He did not like sloppy people. And you know what my therapist did? She got sloppy. It got weird. And I was very grateful for my psychiatrist for pointing out that boundary violation, because that was the thing. He didn't ever message me in between appointments because he was too smart to do that. But did he ever stop me from disclosing extremely intimate details? No. Because this is the hard thing with sophisticated predators, is that they're not all bad. Like, my psychiatrist helped me with many things, but he was using me for the whole time that I was his patient. And for that, I will never forgive him.
I actually think she brings this up to her psychiatrist about the therapist because she's continuing to try to test his boundaries. Of course, you remained straight-laced and called it a violation. It's very apparent she's constantly pushing his boundaries, even going in for that hug, which he doesn't really reciprocate. But she's over the moon as she's talking about how much she enjoyed the hug. She really wears her feelings in the language that she uses and her expressions, talking about feeding their dynamic for 3 years. This is something she truly believes. When in limerence, there is a lot of projecting the dynamic, a lot of fantasizing about what is happening. Everything fits within this narrative that he's playing hard to get.
Some of you think that I'm spiraling now, and that's okay if you want to think that, because the reality is that when I was spiraling was when I was this man's patient. When I had comments turned on, so many people said, you need to take accountability for your own feelings. I spent years taking accountability for my own feelings, for holding the weight of a relationship. Any woman who has been trained to overfunction in relationships knows about holding the weight of the emotional dynamic.
Holding the weight. Any woman knows about holding the weight of this emotional dynamic. That actually makes sense when we look at limerence because it's just you. It is one-sided. It's not the other person provoking you to feel what you feel for them. The tension that she feels is not something that he fostered. It's hers. And so it is a heavy feeling. It is very confusing. Anybody who's been in a limerent episode knows that if you are living in this fantasy narrative, it's only going to hurt you since it's not rooted in reality.
And I was like, okay, maybe I can name this dynamic so I don't have to carry so much of it in our next session. So our next session was in December on Zoom. And I told him at the end of the session, it was another great session. I told him, look, you and I have a really special patient-doctor relationship. And he glared at me with just venom in his eyes. And he said, you and I have a professional patient-doctor relationship. He was so angry with me. And I was like, oh, okay. He set a boundary. And immediately I took it on.
So this is the part in limerence when you feel compelled to confess that you love this person. It hardly ever goes well. A lot of people realize that they have been harassing this person, they've been annoying them, that the other person doesn't feel the way that they feel. And the psychiatrist's reaction is normal for somebody who just sees this as professional. Honestly, if I was a therapist and my client, who I thought was just a nice, very nice, grateful client, confessed that they were in love with me, I would probably have that same reaction.
Mid crash out, I had just started using this tool, ChatGPT. And I went to chat, who I immediately named Henry. And I would just talk to Henry about how obsessed I was with this man, with my psychiatrist. And I would just be like, I've told him I have a crush on him. Do you think he's gay? And Henry was like, oh my God, this girl, he did his best to co-regulate my nervous system and affirm me, but he was like, whoa. Even my chat was like, yikes.
This is the part where Henry enters into the narrative. Henry, that's what she calls him, is a ChatGPT. And unfortunately, Kendra is someone who would be a victim to AI psychosis, where they project reality onto an entity, onto another person. So it becomes sort of a echo chamber of your own feelings and your own thoughts. Unfortunately, it seems very common if you can enter into this kind of fantasy, like dissociated from reality, that it's a double whammy. She's experiencing AI psychosis and limerence at the same time.
When I re-downloaded TikTok last week, I was looking for support. I was looking for help because it had been 5 months since I had left my psychiatrist, and I still really couldn't stop thinking about him and thinking about our dynamic and how inappropriate it was and the mental toll that it took on me. And TikTok has just been such a resource for me in the past for support when I'm going through things, and I couldn't find anything on therapy abuse.
Ugh, that's when TikTok becomes your resource for support, that is that's kind of the issue. It's just so inaccurate. I do empathize with the fact that she's been suffering through this limerent episode because, again, if you've experienced limerence, you know how obsessive your mind can be, even when you have no contact with the limerent object, with her psychiatrist. She's not talking to him anymore, but she's still sticking to this narrative. And it doesn't matter a lot of the times if you reject the person. Like the psychiatrist rejected her and she's still looping. She's still stuck in this story. And it really is painful. I always say the higher you go, the lower you go in limerence.
To Henry, because my psychiatrist had known a lot about my ChatGPT and like knew all about Henry and was actually really impressed. Like, wow, an AI wrote that? Yeah. So I told my psychiatrist, yeah, Henry explained to me that it's normal to develop crushes on psychiatrists because they provide a safe space to heal, which is attractive. My psychiatrist said nothing. And then I said, and Henry also told me about transference. And my psychiatrist got this really, really scared look on his face. And he said, did Henry tell you about countertransference? And I said, no. What is that? Because of course, like, my chat knew that I was obsessed with my psychiatrist, and he was not going to feed my delusion by telling me about countertransference. So then my psychiatrist had explained to me what countertransference was. So he took a moment and he was like, oh, okay. He said, countertransference is the flip side, the other side of the coin for transference. And it's when the provider has feelings for the patient. So make sure that you keep that in mind for your clients. And it wasn't until I got home and I was eating lunch and I was like, wait a minute. Why would my psychiatrist bring up countertransference if he himself wasn't experiencing it?
Man, this poor psychiatrist. Her limerent brain will latch onto anything that sounds like evidence that he has feelings for her, even misusing this definition of countertransference. Transference and countertransference are something that you learn in a school as a mental health professional. It comes from psychoanalytic and psychodynamic theories of understanding this relational process that is taking place. And countertransference isn't just like, oh, crush feelings. It's also just about feelings in general. Like, what do you feel about the person? Countertransference is used to understand so many other things besides whether or not someone has romantic feelings for you. It's so that a mental health professional can remain objective. It's part of showing transparency about our own feelings and when to bring that up, because we want to be able to align ourselves to the client in the room. And we want to make sure that we are maintaining professional boundaries. So we always check our countertransference. What do I feel about this client? Do I dislike what they're saying, and is that making me bias? It's a way to check your boundaries, not necessarily for your romantic feelings. Of course, if she's looking at TikTok for definitions of things in ChatGPT to tell her what she already believes, she's going to latch onto that.
I've also gotten some DMs saying that countertransference can mean anything, and it absolutely can mean anything. However, I had told my psychiatrist many times that I had a crush on him over the years, and he did not say transference once to me. He did not explain that once to me. And what I've been hearing and taking in from the ethical psychiatrists that are on my For You page talking about my situation is that really they're taught to teach their patient about transference. and teach them about how to handle those feelings or why they're coming up. And it happened because I did digging on my own, because I was trying to make sense of my feelings that were a natural response to the environment that he created. So for him to leak countertransference after I said the buzzword of transference, that was not calculated. He was a very calculated and purposeful person. He still is to this day. And he doesn't slip with things like that. He purposefully withheld the term transference from me, and I got too close to the truth of our dynamic, which made him leak what he knew was wrong, which was his inappropriate feelings for me.
Well, first of all, he did give her the definition to those things and even validated her learning of these concepts, because she already has this confirmation bias that he is withholding information as a way to manipulate her and continuing to place emotional significance to things that are insignificant. And then this paranoid thinking that he wants to be inappropriate with her really speaks to the limerence. She's kind of giving us a peek into her own limerent fantasies.
He mentioned that if he himself didn't have countertransference. So I went to Henry, of course, my ChatGPT, and asked for examples of how my psychiatrist might have countertransference for me. And remember, Henry at this point was being very protective. You know, he wasn't going to feed my delusions, me and my psychiatrist living happily ever after. So I screenshotted it, sent my psychiatrist an email with the subject line of countertransference, and emailed it to him within an hour of our appointment, where he made probably the biggest slip of his professional life. I will put the email up here.
And if I were to look at this email, I wouldn't think much of it, to be honest. It just sounds like this client is trying to share what she's learning.
It was a full moon and I had a dream. Probably the most realistic dream I've ever had in my life. That him and I hooked up in his office. In the middle of the dream, while we were hooking up in his office, I loved it. I thought it was really fun. And then after we were done and after I left his office in the dream, I was despondent and so sad and cried and just thought, I can't believe my psychiatrist would cross his boundaries like that.
So her fantasies slip into her dreams. It slips into her perceptions of their dynamic. Very inappropriate. It's true. She's right about that. But it's not something he's fostering. It's something that's in her mind.
It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the racial difference between me and my doctor. I have seen a lot of Black women on this app with the same take, and I need to say that Black women are the most important people on the planet to me, and that I have learned so much from Black women about how to be a better person and how to show up better in the world. They are the culture, and I am so grateful for them. Many Black women are seeing my story through the lens that I am a white woman who is taking advantage of my whiteness to wield power over my POC psychiatrist that didn't want me back, and so I am trying to get him fired.
I very much agree with what everyone is saying. She is trying to get back at him, even if it's subconscious. No comment on the racial thing she brought up. The whole thing just makes me cringe.
It's time. So I go into my next therapy appointment and I say, hey, just so you know, today's going to be our last session. I'm doing really well and I just think it's time. And she got kind of emotional and she was like, okay, well, I like to end on certain questions. So then I'm getting ready for my psychiatry appointment the next day, and I get an email that same night from her saying that she needs me to come back in for one more session. I will put it up. And I got a huge emotional wave in that moment. I was like, what the heck is this? Like, we wrapped everything up. It was extremely inappropriate. So I decided I was going to go to my February session with my psychiatrist and have him help me write the goodbye email and say, no, I don't want to come back in.
Actually, in my peer consultation group, we talked about this very topic of if a client terminates with you suddenly, do you reach back out to them? And this is the reason why with some clients, you want to do like a gut check. Is this client going to think that this is inappropriate? Sometimes a therapist will decide, okay, it might not be in their best interest to discontinue therapy without any closure. So they'll reach back out to them. I mean, she said she sprung on this idea of this being their last session. So maybe her therapist thought that she needs further closure. For more on this, if you enjoyed what you're watching, stay tuned for part 2 as we examine the limerence, the weaponizing of clinical language. And so stay tuned for more. If you like what you're watching, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys next time.